Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about questioning attitude, nothingness and metaphysics. We are going to look at Heidegger's lecture entitled What is Metaphysics that he gave in 1929 after having published his magnum opus Being and Time in 1927. The objective is to get to know ourselves a bit metaphysically. Philosophy teachers and also non-philosophy teachers pay attention to this lecture closely. As much as his content is interesting, his method of lecturing is even more so. Imagine yourself entering inside the lecture hall. Your lecturer is ready and he has given you a particular topic on which he will give the lecture. Let's assume it is what is metaphysics. What would you expect during the course of the lecture? Definitions from Plato onwards, perhaps even something about pre-Socratics mixed in, then perhaps a bit of Spinoza, Descartes and Kant, concluding with a bit of contemporary flavor of where metaphysics stands. This is what you would expect from a normal lecturer. But what about an extraordinary lecturer like Heidegger? You would not expect anything. You would just want to go on a philosophical journey with him and listen to what he has to say, just as we would do now. What is Metaphysics is not published as a lecture form. It is a collection of lecture notes written in heavily condensed aphorisms of wisdom. But he did take care to write the very first lines he spoke in the lecture hall. He begins thus: What is metaphysics? The question awakens expectations of a discussion about metaphysics. This we will forego. Instead, we will take up a particular metaphysical question. In this way, it seems, we will let ourselves be transposed directly into metaphysics. Only in this way will we provide metaphysics the proper occasion to introduce itself. Our plan begins with the unfolding of a metaphysical inquiry, then tries to elaborate the question and concludes by answering it. If there were any other lecturer saying something like, "This we will forego," in a couple of minutes you would have the lecture hall half empty. You call me up for metaphysics and you will forego talking about it. But immediately after that, Heidegger identifies an even more interesting way to explore metaphysics. He does not say, "I will be transposed." He welcomes his listeners and readers to join in the journey, where all of us would become metaphysicians, by not just coldly addressing a couple of definitions and debates about metaphysics. No, we are going to do metaphysics together. In this lecture, we can see the seeds of Sartre's being and nothingness blooming at every phrase. The first thing to notice here is the questioning attitude, which is also one of the first things that Sartre discusses in his magnum opus. What does posing a question do? It raises expectations about the questioned object, as Heidegger points out here. Expectation of knowledge is mirrored in the realization of the lack of something in our being. A question starts a movement within our being. To address this expectation, he takes the subjective route in lieu of the standard objective route. He invites us to let him lead us into the unfolding of a metaphysical inquiry. In the whole essay, he cursorily mentions Plato and Hegel, always letting us take the center stage without throwing in big names to intimidate us, as if he knows better than us. To further reinforce the participatory nature of inquiry, he underlines the two main characteristics of metaphysical inquiry. First, every metaphysical question always encompasses the whole range of metaphysical problems. Each question is itself always the whole. Therefore, second, every metaphysical question can be asked only in such a way that the questioner as such is present together with the question, that is placed in question. Every metaphysical question, he says, when inquired with attention, brings under question the whole of metaphysics. Hence, rather than talking generally about metaphysics, his approach would be to address a particular metaphysical question and consequently metaphysics in general. Furthermore, along with metaphysics, the questioner himself is under scrutiny. Later, Heidegger would assert, metaphysics belongs to the nature of man. It is neither a division of academic philosophy nor a field of arbitrary notions. Metaphysics is the basic occurrence of Dasein. It is Dasein itself. Because the truth of metaphysics dwells in this groundless ground, it stands in closest proximity to the constantly lurking possibility of deepest error. Metaphysical inquiry, in essence, is the inquiry of man. But we are far off from reaching that conclusion. It is always recommended that the starting point for the lecture must be something to which the listener can relate to. 7 years before this lecture, in 1922, Einstein's theory of relativity had finally been proven by astronomers observing full solar eclipse in Australia. Science was the talk of the day, and who better than Heidegger knows the pulse of the public? Before going to metaphysics, he presents the discussion of physics and the nature of scientific inquiry. Heidegger describes the intentional object of scientific inquiry. He states, when we follow their most proper intention, in all the sciences we relate ourselves to beings themselves. He continues, the relation to the world that pervades all the sciences as such lets them, each according to its particular content and mode of being, seek beings themselves in order to make them objects of investigation and to determine their ground. Being themselves are two words that need some explanation, because they are essential to understand the attitude that a person performing scientific inquiry brings to the world. Sachs would help us a bit here. In Being and Nothingness, he distinguishes between being in itself and being for itself. To put it very briefly, being in itself is the mode of being in which the questioning attitude is absent. In fact, this mode of being does not have the potential of questioning. Whereas being for itself possesses consciousness and belongs to humans only, who can question their being, or generally speaking, have the potential of adopting the questioning attitude. Being in itself can be something like a tree. Hardly do we ever see it moan about its immobility, whereas being for itself is a special mode of being pertinent only to human beings. When Heidegger mentions that the objects of scientific inquiry are being themselves, he is referring to the inert material world. What he does not understand is the misguided pride of the scientific community that only being themselves matter and nothing. He explains, what is remarkable is that precisely in the way scientific man secures to himself what is most properly his, he speaks of something different. What should be examined are beings only, and besides that, nothing. Beings alone, and further, nothing. Solely beings, and beyond that, nothing. This exclusivity is an indication of the scientific attitude, and it is not just with science. He also mentions mathematics, for instance, and highlights its obsession with exactness. Every discipline brings with it its attitude, which affects the way we see the world and act in it. But that is not where he takes the lecture. He wanted us to reach a certain point of inquiry where he could introduce one of the central themes of his lecture, the nothing. Science wants to stay away from any discussion of nothing. It is something that can be ignored as it cannot be known. But what if we actually turn our attention to the inquiry of the nothing? Heidegger would have looked around himself. There might be scientific people sitting in the audience. Certainly there would have been a real noise in the corridors of universities regarding recent scientific breakthroughs. And then he would have taken a moment to say thus, with this reflection on our contemporary existence as one determined by science, we find ourselves enmeshed in a controversy. In the course of this controversy, a question has already evolved. It only requires explicit formulation. How is it with the nothing? We are now getting into the thick of metaphysical inquiry, the unfolding of one of the foundational concepts of the 20th century, i.e., nothingness. The Heideggerian way of inquiry can be seen clearly in the progress of this inquiry. He moves from the most revelatory common questions to less revelatory fundamental questions. This is why it can be called unfolding or revelatory method of inquiry, in which the inquirer lets himself be led by the unknown. From question on science, we are led to another question. Heidegger presses us to consider the unique problem in front of us. He demands, what is the nothing? Our very first approach to this question has something unusual about it. In our asking, we posit the nothing in advance as something that is such and such. We posit it as a being, but that is exactly what it is distinguished from. Interrogating the nothing, asking what and how it, the nothing, is, turns what is interrogated into its opposite. The question deprives itself of its own object. Accordingly, every answer to this question is also impossible from the start, for it necessarily assumes the form, the nothing is this or that. With regard to the nothing, question and answer alike are inherently absurd. Asking question about nothing deprives it of its own object. Just moments ago we were inquiring about science and being themselves and material world. We knew our object of inquiry. We could feel it, see it, touch it, and put it in laboratory to know its nature. From that kind of inquiry to this unforeseen absurd inquiry of an object that is normally considered to be the opposite of being, or as Heidegger says, the counter concept of being, requires a radical shift in our perspective of the world. It turns our attention to metaphysics immediately. We cannot physically know the nothing, but we can certainly get some revelation regarding it if we follow through this inquiry metaphysically. Moreover, it also presents problem to our method of thinking, he explains. For thinking, which is always essentially thinking about something, must act in a way contrary to its own essence when it thinks of the nothing. Here he is referring to the intentionality thesis of phenomenology, which in essence says that there is no intention or thought without an intentional object. Intentional object is the object towards which the thought is directed. Our thoughts are fundamentally teleological. Whenever we think about something. Therefore, how can it be possible to think about something as nothing? The answer to this question pushes him further deep down the ladder of fundamental nature of inquiry. He refers back to the questioning attitude that precedes the questioning act. We are seeking something, and its expectation attunes us with a certain mood, or more precisely with the mental state that overshadows us in our inquiry. He gives the example of boredom to explain this point. When we are not actually busy with things or ourselves, this as a whole overcomes us. For example, in genuine boredom. Boredom is still distant when it is only this book or that play, that business or this idleness that drags on. It erupts when one is bored. Profound boredom, drifting here and there in the abysses of our existence like a muffling fog, removes all things, and men and oneself along with it, into a remarkable indifference. This boredom reveals beings as a whole. Before Heidegger, hardly any philosopher took moods so seriously. Certainly no one formalized the relationship between philosophical pursuit and moods to the extent we find in his writings. Boredom is something every one of us wants to escape, but only if we knew its revelatory power we would all get bored happily. Our engagement with the world never ends. Even when we are bored, we are not without beings surrounding us. We have our phones, our televisions, our books, etc. In the midst of beings, boredom somehow manages to transcend our engagement with the world and provides us with a particular kind of reflective attitude that attunes us to see the world in a particular way. being reveals itself to us piecemeal through different attunements or moods or states of mind. Heidegger is on the search for that particular state of mind that allows the nothing to reveal itself to us. Rather than focusing on the content of the question, he has turned inward to our subjectivity, which opens itself to the world so that it can reveal itself, but always conditioned by a state of mind. So, what is the proper attunement when nothingness is under scrutiny? Does such an attunement, in which man is brought before the nothing itself, occur in human existence? This can and does occur, although rarely enough and only for a moment, in the fundamental mood of anxiety. Anxiety is a fundamental mood according to him, and sadly now it is the catchword for pharmaceuticals to earn millions. Hang around. We will continue this inquiry in the next video, in which we will look at Heidegger's position on anxiety and its relation to nothingness. Till then, like this video, share and subscribe to the channel. Au revoir. Thanks everyone.